The ship should not have been there. That was the first thing Commander Alas of the submarine Wrath noticed when, at 3:40 station time, his console lit up from the long-range sensor array. The contact, sitting in the buffer zone between the consensus-controlled space and the human border systems, was not moving. It simply sat there like a stone on a riverbed, patient, heavy, and completely indifferent to the water flowing around it. Alas had been awake for 2 hours, which was not unusual. On rotational patrols, he slept poorly. 12 years of this service, and his body still treated every night shift like a minor emergency. He sat in the chair of the patrol frigate Inevitability of Return, a cold cup of grain drink on the armrest and a transfer request rejected 3 times in the last 8 months, resting in his personnel file. He looked at the contact on his screen. He looked at his transfer request. He looked at the contact again. "Sensor team," he said. "Give me the profile of that contact." The answer came 30 seconds later. It was a human ship. A Mjolnir-class destroyer, a category of warship that consensus tactical analysts had spent nearly 2 years studying and still couldn't fully comprehend. Not because the ships were complex, but because the actions of these ships in combat were complex. The ships themselves were just large blocks of metal with engines and weapons mounted on them. Nothing remarkable. Nothing that should make anyone lie awake at night. And yet, the contact was broadcasting a damaged ship signal, an automated signal, a signal that read, "We are broken, we are not a threat, and for the sake of everything you hold dear, don't shoot us." Every spacefaring civilization used some version of this. It was one of the few agreements reached between humans and the consensus without a prior war. Alas straightened in his chair. He told himself it would just be a damaged warship, a crew waiting for rescue or evacuation. He would file a report on the damaged warship, flag it for high command, and spend the rest of his shift looking at empty space, thinking about the transfer he clearly would never get. "Full scan," he said. "Level 1. Let's see what we're dealing with." The scanner array swung out from the belly of the Inevitability of Return like something slowly waking up, reaching out through space toward the drifting human ship. A Level 1 scan was broadband. It determined size, mass, basic power, hull integrity. It was the first look, the look that said, "Is it worth curiosity or concern?" The results came in. Alas read them. He read them again. "Repeat the scan," he said. His sensor chief, a young officer named Dredd who had been in the position for 4 months and still found border patrolling interesting, the way people find things interesting before they have time to lose them, raised his head from his console. "Sir, repeat the scan." "Check for instrument drift first." Dredd ran a diagnostics check on the instruments. "Clean." He repeated the scan. The results came back identical. The human ship's main reactor was offline, not damaged, not operating at low power. Offline. Just offline. The type of shutdown that meant it had been dark for a long time. His system estimated it at 72 hours, based on the residual thermal signature, which was barely a signature at all. A ghost of heat. Fading. That was normal. Ships lost their reactors. It was one of those things that happened in war. What was abnormal was the weapons complex. It was active, not in standby mode, not powered down to a safe state. Active. Charging. The human ship had a cold reactor. Not a single main power source that Alas's scanner could identify, and a weapon that was drawing power from somewhere and preparing to fire. Alas picked up his grain drink. It was cold. He put it back down. "This can't be," said Dredd, looking at his own screen with the expression of a man who had just been told that 2 + 2 = 7 by a calculator he had personally calibrated that morning. "Run a Level 2 diagnostic of our own sensor complex," said Alas. "I just ran an instrument check." Full diagnostic, not just drift. Everything. Dredd ran it. It took 4 minutes. The Inevitability of Return sensor complex returned a result without a single malfunction. No errors, no calibration issues, no software glitches. The ship was reading perfectly. The human destroyer still had a cold reactor and active weapons. Alas turned his chair toward the main display, the large one that took up most of the front wall of the command deck. He projected the scan data onto it so he could see everything at once. Hull integrity, poor. Approximately 40% structural damage on the port side, which meant this ship had been hit very hard recently, and the ship had taken that hit and continued to exist. Engine output 17% on the port side, which was almost nothing. Almost. Star drives were operating at 60%, so the ship was drifting, slowly rotating, not flying in a straight line. It had been in a battle. It had not left the battle. It was still here, in the buffer zone, slowly rotating. Reactor cold, weapons charging. Alas pulled up the tactical report for this sector. 6 hours ago, there had been a clash. A consensus strike group had advanced toward a human forward post at the border. In the report, the clash was labeled a success. The human post was neutralized. He cross-referenced the ship's ID code from the transponder signal. The human post, defended by one ship, the Unconditional. He was looking at her right now. She had been declared neutralized in the clash report. She had her own thoughts on the matter. Alas told his comms officer to open a long-range channel, then stopped. Not yet, he wanted more data. He wanted to understand what he was looking at before he started talking to it. Biometric scan level 3, he said. I need a crew count. A level 3 scan was personal. It penetrated the hull and searched for living beings. It measured body heat, breathing rhythms, cardiovascular activity. It was used to determine the presence of survivors on a ship, their number, and their condition. The consensus used it before boarding actions to know what they would face. The scan took longer, 6 minutes. The results came in, and Alas stared at them for a long time without saying anything. 23 vital signs, all human, all alive, which was already more than the clash report had assumed. Their physical state was heightened, cardiovascular activity high, adrenaline markers off the charts, cortisol at levels that the standard xenobiology manual classified as an extreme acute stress reaction. These bodies knew they were in danger. Bodies that were producing every chemical signal that said, this is very bad, and you need to do something about it. He understood that. He expected that. What he didn't understand was the last line of the biometric report. His translation package was working in the background in passive mode, meaning it was quietly processing any signals that resembled communication. It had been doing it automatically. It had been doing it for years. He had never received a result that read like this. Synchronized vocalization detected. 23 subjects. Harmonic pattern. Classification. Unknown. Unknown, Alas said out loud. Dredd looked at him. Sir? Alas turned the display toward him. Dredd read it. He read it again. What does that mean, Dredd? Asked Alas. Unknown. It means the translator has no category for this. The translator has 80 categories. 81, 214, said Alas, because he had read the user manual during a very slow week last year, and it has no category for this. Alas extracted the raw audio from the scan. Biometric sensors didn't usually record audio. They measured biological signals, not sound, but the vocalization was strong enough, coordinated enough to register as a signal pattern worthy of logging. He ran it through the translation package manually, accelerating the process, forcing the system to try all its structures. The system tried. It yielded. Musical ritual vocalization, human origin, approximate age of composition 180-220 years. Function, unknown. Again, unknown. Alas leaned back in his chair. Outside the front viewport, the Unconditional continued its slow rotation, patient, like a stone. 23 people with exploded biochemistry, a cold reactor, an active weapons complex, and some kind of group vocalization that his most sophisticated translation software capable of parsing 60 living languages and 1,200 dead ones could only call unknown. He piped the audio to the main speakers. What came out of them stopped everyone on the command deck. This was not what anyone expected. This was not a distress sound. This was not tactical communication or damage control orders or the sharp, staccato exchanges his crew used during crisis operations. This was, and Alas had no better word, smooth, multi-layered. 23 voices were not interrupting each other. They were doing something together. Something that required all of them to move in one direction at the same time, and the result was a single sound composed of many parts. It filled the command deck of the inevitability of return for about 12 seconds. Nobody said anything. Dredd looked as if he had been lightly struck by something small and invisible. The navigation officer, a woman named Saris, who had completed 47 border patrols and was not easily impressed, completely stopped her work and just listened. Alas reached out and cut the audio stream. That is what the crew of a heavily damaged human warship is doing, he said. He wasn't addressing anyone in particular. He was speaking into the void. That's how you talk when you're trying to make something real by saying it. They are singing. Nobody confirmed or denied it. Alas looked at the biometric data again. He found the section on performance indicators. The scan could estimate some things about physical coordination, reaction speed, motor skills based on detected movement patterns. He asked for it because he always asked for it. It spoke to the combat capability of the crew. Conditions, injuries, fatigue markers, high. Several people showed signs of blood loss and untreated trauma. All of that was expected. What was unexpected was their coordination metric. It was high. Not high for a damaged crew, not high for a crew under stress. High, period. As high as elite units during peak performance, not on broken ships drifting at the edge of the buffer zone after a battle they should have lost. The weapons complex charged a bit more. Alas sat very quietly. He had filed 40 intercept reports on human ships in 12 years. He had written the phrase abnormal human behavior so many times that it had stopped meaning anything to him. It was just a checkbox, a category that explained things that didn't fit into other categories. You write it and move on. Return to waiting for a transfer that likely would never happen. He opened the incident report template. He began filling it out and reached the contact classification field. He sat there with the cursor in the field for almost a minute. Then he opened a separate escalation form, a non-standard incident report, an emergency escalation that traveled quickly up the chain, bypassed normal processing, and landed on a senior analyst's desk within an hour. He had filed 2 of these in 12 years. The first was a genuine emergency with a weapons discharge. The second was a navigational crisis. He was about to file a third because a damaged ship was singing to him, and its guns were charging without a power source he could explain. He marked the classification of the incident. He typed slowly. Not because he wasn't sure, but because once you write something down, it becomes real in a way it wasn't before. Abnormal human. Then, because the form had a field for additional notes, and he felt that additional notes were justified, he typed, "Ship should be non-functional per clash report filed 6 hours ago. Ship appears to disagree with this assessment. Crew is performing active synchronized vocalization. Weapons complex is charging without an identified power source. Requesting specialist review. Immediately." He sent it. He looked again at the unconditional on the main display. It was still rotating, still there, still not moving anywhere. The weapons complex was already at 62% charge. Alas picked up his cold grain drink, looked at it, and put it back down. Dread quietly turned the audio stream back on. Just quietly, barely audible. The singing filled the room again, soft, multi-layered, and completely inexplicable, coming from 23 people on a ship that shouldn't have remained in one piece, let alone in this sector, let alone alive. The navigation officer returned to her work, but she was tapping her finger in rhythm. Alas didn't tell her to stop. He was very busy trying to understand what he was looking at, and he suspected he would be busy with it for a long time. Outside in the darkness, the unconditional held its position, patiently, breathing, waiting for what would happen next, with the calm of something that had already decided that nothing would stop it. The message arrived on senior analyst Sarah Stow's desk at 4:41, which meant it was routed as an emergency escalation, which meant someone in the border corps saw something that caused them enough nervousness to use the fast channel. Saris read the first 3 lines of the report. Then she took her fourth hand, reached across the table, and closed the research file she had been working on before the message arrived. Not because it was unrelated, but because it was very related, and she needed a moment before she looked at both things at once. She had been working on the file for 6 years. It started as a side project, something she worked on between official assignments because official assignments didn't ask questions that she felt needed answers. It grew slowly, then faster. That's how things grow when you keep finding new evidence of what you already suspect. It was a model, a behavioral model built from combat logs, biometric scans, and signal intercepts, and every scrap of data on military clashes involving humans that was contained in the consensus archives. She had a name for it in her personal notes. The real problem. Her superiors, twice when she had brought this up in meetings, called it overinterpretation. One of them called it a hobby, in the tone people use when they mean this isn't real work, and you should stop doing it. The other was a bit kinder, which in practice meant he told her she asked interesting questions before redirecting her to a quarterly behavior review that needed updating. The quarterly behavior review always needed updating. She fully opened the escalation report from subordinate Alas and read it all. Then she extracted the raw scan data he had attached. She was going to do her job, which was to analyze this data, write an assessment, and pass it up the chain. That was what she was here for. That was what she was good at. She had been good at it for 15 years, since she transferred from the academic directorate under circumstances that still made her jaw clench if she thought about them directly. She started with the reactor reading. Main reactor offline, cold 72 hours. She cross-referenced this with the clash report from 6 hours ago. The Unconditional had taken a direct hit to the reactor section during the clash. The strike group commander had noted it as a fatal strike. The reactor went critical and then dead. Just like that happens to reactors when something goes very wrong, very quickly. So, the reactor was cold. Normal, not surprising. She moved to the weapons complex. Active. 62% charge at time of scan. Increasing. She stared at this for a moment. A weapons complex needs power. Power comes from a reactor or a secondary backup system. The main reactor was cold. She searched the Unconditional's ship specifications, which were in the consensus archives. The consensus made an effort to collect all available human technical documents, which was somewhat easier than it sounds because humans published a surprising amount about their own military equipment. A habit the consensus had spent years trying to understand and eventually classified as a cultural anomaly. The Unconditional carried a secondary emergency power system, capacity enough to provide life support and basic comms for about 96 hours. Not weapons at that load level. The secondary system was not designed to run weapons. Saris checked the power consumption rate of the weapons complex. She checked the capacity of the secondary system again. The math didn't add up. She wrote it out by hand in full, just as her first scientific mentor insisted she write out calculations when something seemed wrong, because writing it out in full allowed one to catch the moment when you made an assumption you shouldn't have made. She wrote it 3 times. The math still didn't add up. The Unconditional was consuming more energy for its weapons than its surviving systems could possibly produce, which meant it was drawing it from somewhere else. Saris opened her The Real Problem model file and added a note, a small one, just a flag that read, Power Source Unknown, Suncre Data Weapons, Case Number UCN 47. She had done this 41 times in 6 years. Added a note, added a flag, another data point that said, This does not fit the structure we use. Now 42 times. She moved to the biometric data. This was where she lived. This was the center of her work. Biometrics. What was the body doing? What was the body telling her about the mind that controlled it? She had read more human biometric data than anyone in the Consensus Research Corps, and she knew it. And she had stopped finding it interesting a long time ago because the data kept saying the same thing and nobody listened. 23 crew members, elevated stress markers, high cortisol, high adrenaline, blood loss markers in 8 people, which meant 8 out of 23 were wounded. Some seriously, standard for a ship that had been in a heavy battle. She looked at the coordination metrics. Then she looked at them again, leaning closer as if physical proximity to the screen would help her understand what she was seeing. Coordination metric, 91%, a composite metric measuring how well a crew moves, communicates, and functions as a single unit. The standard for a fully rested, fully staffed elite consensus combat crew was 87%, 23 people. Wounded, exhausted, on a ship with a cold reactor, were operating at a higher level of coordinated action than the best fleets of the consensus in ideal conditions. She leaned back in her chair. This wasn't a new discovery. This was what her model said. This was what the 42 data points said. The worse things got for human crews, the better they performed. Right up to the point where they stopped performing, which was usually a point that was so far beyond what the consensus considered a reasonable limit that by the time it arrived, the environment was already substantially damaged. She looked at the synchronized vocalization data. Unknown, said Alas's translation package. Saris's package was better than the standard military model. She had spent 8 months modifying it specifically for the analysis of human cultural production, which her supervisor described as an unusual use of her discretionary research hours, and then did not stop her from it. She ran the raw audio file through her modified translation framework. It took 11 minutes. The result was longer than the unknown musical composition. Human origin. Genre classification. Folk. Traditional. Language. West African dialect complex. Assumed primary language Twi. Akan. Composition. Mourning tradition. Specifically adapted for collective loss. Translation approximate. We are still here. The earth has not taken us. We are still here. and we will be here when the morning comes. Repetitive structure, continuous cycle, active participants, 23 out of 23 crew members. Saris read it 3 times. The song, funeral. They were singing a funeral song, not for themselves. The phrase didn't mean resignation to death. It meant a refusal to let death be the last word. We are still here, again and again. 23 voices sang. We are still here, on a ship that, according to all official reports, should have been wreckage. She looked at the weapons charge data again. She extracted the timestamps. She overlaid the weapons charge rate on the vocalization data, matching timestamps. The charge rate was higher during periods of active vocalization. She overlaid them 3 more times to be sure, not a little higher. Consistently, measurably higher. When all 23 crew members sang together, the weapons charged faster. When the singing was interrupted for about 4 minutes in the middle of the recording, likely a meal break, she noted that the charge rate dropped to the base level. She opened her model. She opened a section that she had labeled with the straightforward honesty of a person who writes what they think nobody else will read, what shouldn't be true but remains true. And she read what she had written 2 years ago, when she began working on this direction in earnest. Human performance under stress does not follow the survival calculus. Every known intelligent being shows a measurable decline in coordinated group function as conditions approach the survival threshold. Humans show an increase. This increase is not individual. Individual human performance under extreme stress follows normal degradation curves. The anomaly is group performance. The anomaly is what they do together. Current hypothesis: human group cohesion creates something functioning as a force multiplier, but acting through social, not biological or technological mechanisms. When a group is under threat and the group reacts as a single unit, the unit acts beyond the sum of its parts. Problem: organisms don't work that way. The individual survival calculus should dominate at the cellular level regardless of social structure. Group behavior should start to disintegrate as individual survival pressure increases. Why does it not disintegrate? She had pondered this question for 2 years. She looked at the 23 people singing on a broken ship. She thought that perhaps she had found part of the answer. She extracted the comms logs from the scan, not the vocalization, but tactical comms. Operational chat. Short packets of messages that crews use during damage control and systems management. She ran them through the full translation package and began reading. Most of it was practical. System status, repair updates, power routing decisions, but the practical comms were constantly interrupted. By what? Even shorter dialogues. 3 words, 4 words, sometimes just 1. She marked them and highlighted them. You okay? Right here. Connected. Got it. Don't you dare. I'm here. She read 147 such short dialogues over a 6-hour period on a ship that was dealing with a near-catastrophic system failure in a potentially hostile sector, being wounded, and operating on emergency power. 147 times in the middle of everything else, crew members were checking on each other, saying, I see you. I know you're there. I haven't forgotten you. Saris leaned back in her chair and stared at the ceiling for a while. This wasn't tactical comms. This wasn't what she was trained to classify as operationally significant data. These weren't reports or orders or system updates, but it wasn't nothing. It was something. She didn't have the exact vocabulary for this in the consensus analytical system because the consensus analytical system was built for species that acted on a survival calculus, and a survival calculus was an individual equation. It asked, what do I need to survive? These people were asking a different question, over and over. In the middle of a disaster with a cold reactor and charging weapons and 22 other people depending on them. Each of them was asking, are you still here with me? And every time, the answer was, yes. She opened a new case file and began writing her assessment. She wrote, as always, as one writes reports, clearly, factually, carefully. She wrote about the reactor mismatch and the weapons data and the coordination, synchronization, vocalization metrics. She wrote about what the data showed and what it implied. She wrote the way people write when they know what is said will cause others discomfort. Then she reached the conclusion section and stopped. She looked at her model. She looked at the data. She looked at the 42 flagged cases. And this new sentence she had written 2 years ago, why does it not disintegrate? And she thought of the 23 wounded people on a dying ship, singing to each other across every room, corridor, and station, 147 times asking, are you still here? 147 times answering, yes. She knew why it didn't disintegrate. She had known for a long time. She was just waiting for someone to give her permission to say it, and she began to realize that the permission would not come, and she would have to say it without it. She wrote the conclusion: human group cohesion under stress does not diminish because humans do not fight for themselves. The individual survival calculus applies to individual survival. These crew members are trying to survive not for themselves, they are trying to survive for each other. The mechanism that should cause group disintegration, individual self-preservation prevailing over group loyalty, is not activated because the individual's primary survival instinct has been redirected. They want to live because the person next to them needs them to. This is not a tactical ploy, this is not a cultural quirk. This is a functional structure of how humans process threat. They do not ask, "Will I survive?" They ask, "Will you survive?" The consensus is trying to defeat an opponent by applying pressure to a threshold that does not exist in the way we assumed. She stopped. She saved the document. She looked at the section of the report where she had to attach the supporting files. She opened her model, the one her superiors called a hobby. 42 data points and 6 years of work in the slowly forming shape of something she shouldn't have figured out. She attached it. She marked the submission for immediate consideration by command. She sent it before she could think about the career consequences, which were not small. Then she turned the audio stream back on the singing and sat in her office in the dark, in the cold air recirculated through the ship, which she sometimes forgot also carried 26 other lives, and listened as 23 people on a broken vessel sang about the fact that they were still here. They were still here. She categorized that as accurate. Outside the viewport of the inevitability of return, the Unconditional continued to rotate, continued to charge, continued to breathe. 12 consensus ships sat in a loose ring around it. It seemed unperturbed. Fleet Commander Tashan Vor had commanded an active war theater for 3 years, and he knew very well when Data was lying to him. Data lied all the time. Sensors drifted. Observers filtered what they saw through what they expected to see. Reports were written by people who had careers to protect and reputations to maintain and superiors who didn't always want to hear the full story. Vor, in 31 years of military service, had learned to read behind the surface of a report and find the true shape beneath it. He read subordinate Alas's escalation at 5. He read senior analyst Saris Dow's assessment at 5:20. He sat for a long time with both. He had 12 ships arranged in a ring around the Unconditional. It was a precaution. A human destroyer with active weapons and an inexplicable power source in a buffer zone required precaution. Regardless of how damaged it looked, he had ordered a redeployment from his flagship, still half asleep and not fully realizing what he was redeploying around. Now he was fully aware. He read Saris Dow's report a second time, slower. He vaguely remembered her name. From somewhere, he searched his files. 3 years ago, at the start of the war, she had published a paper arguing that human behavior in combat required special study and that the consensus was misreading the data. He had received a summary of the paper from his research directorate with the addendum. Interesting theoretical work, having no operational significance. He had set it aside without reading it fully. Now he read the paper. He read the model attached to it. He read the 42 data points. 6 years of accumulated evidence, the same conclusions appearing in every clash. Human groups under maximum pressure act better, not worse. The survival calculus does not apply as it should. The disintegration mechanism is not activated. He sat with it. His coffee had gone cold. Outside his viewport, the Unconditional continued its slow rotation, patient and unreasonable, like a problem that refuses to resolve just because you look at it long enough. He had been writing his post-battle reports for 3 years. He was an observant, thorough writer. He documented what was happening with the precision of someone who understood that records outlive people and that what is recorded becomes the truth. His reports showed that the consensus military was handling a difficult conflict with steady progress, more territory, more resources, a gradual, measurable advantage. Saris Dow's model showed the same clashes. On the other hand, the numbers were the same, the outcomes were the same, the interpretation was different. He was measuring the wrong thing. He shoved the thought into a box. Not because it was unimportant, it was the most important thing he had thought about in 3 years. But because the Unconditional was still there, the weapon was now charging at 73% and continued to charge, and he needed to resolve the immediate situation before dealing with the larger one. He opened the command channel to his comms officer. I need a direct line to the Unconditional, he said. Standard military frequencies are broad enough to catch, if they don't use them. Yes, sir. Do you want to wait for the protocol translation setup? He thought, no, live translation only. I want to speak in real time. The channel opened. He waited. For a moment, there was nothing but the quiet hiss of an open frequency. Then came a click, a small sound as if someone were picking up a receiver or activating a local communication device, and then a female voice, a bit raspy, as if someone who hadn't slept for too long or was speaking through smoke, non-panicked, informal, the average voice of a person who was tired and alert at the same time. Senior Chief Petty Officer of the Unconditional, Amara Ose Bonsu. Speak. Vor's translation package processed this in real time, translating English into his own tongue of percussive beats after she spoke, the half-second delay that would be present throughout the conversation, like the short gap between lightning and thunder. He had expected the commander the protocol of rank and file. He had a whole opening speech ready. Formal language, military courtesy, the architecture of how civilized opponents talk to each other during a standoff. He had a surrender negotiation structure ready, wrapped in polite words that made it look like an offer, not a demand. He was not prepared for a senior chief petty officer. He quickly found her in the database, reflexively. Senior Chief Petty Officer Amara Ose Bonsu, 34 years old, 14 years of service. Not a commander of the Unconditional, not an executive officer. Not anyone in the command line Vor would have expected to hear, but the senior surviving member of the crew. He understood what that meant. He set aside his prepared speech and simply said, "This is Fleet Commander Taishan Vor, commanding the Consensus Response Group. I am speaking to the crew of the Unconditional. Your ship is surrounded. We are aware of your current situation. We would like to discuss terms." A pause, not long, 2 seconds. He had the sensation that someone was processing information quickly. "What terms?" she said. "Cessation of hostilities, safe evacuation of your crew, medical assistance. We see from our biometric scans that several of your people require treatment. Full compliance with consensus detention protocols, temporary pending the resolution of the conflict." He had said this, or a version of this, many times. It was a reasonable offer. It was, in the circumstances, a generous offer. Another pause. "A little longer. We're fine," she said. His translator deciphered it, and he looked at it for a moment. "We're fine." He requested a secondary semantic analysis. The secondary analysis returned. Colloquial expression indicating an adequate status, rejection of need or offer, informal register, high confidence. She had just said no to him in 2 words. "Senior Chief Petty Officer," he said carefully, "I want to be sure the translation is accurate. You are refusing the offer of medical assistance and evacuation? I'm saying we don't need it. Our scans show that 8 members of your crew have sustained significant injuries. We know your main reactor has been offline for approximately 72 hours. We know that too." He looked at the biometric scan data on an additional screen next to him. The weapons complex was now at 78%. "We are also tracking that your weapons complex is actively charging. May I ask what you are charging it for?" A slightly longer pause. "Precaution," she said. He had been a fleet commander for 3 years, and before that a ship captain for 9 years. He knew what precaution meant. In a tactical context, it meant, "I am ready to shoot someone. I just haven't decided who yet." "I want to be frank with you," he said. "You are surrounded by 12 warships. Your reactor is offline. My analysts cannot determine how your weapons complex is drawing power. I don't know if your weapons actually function, but I must treat it as if they do." "That's fair. That's fair." He found that, for the first time in a long time, he was unsure of the next sentence. Every other conversation he had ever had in this position followed a recognizable form. Fear was a language he spoke fluently. Despair had a grammar. Even anger had a structure he could navigate. But this calmness, this economy of 2 words, this voice, sounding like someone discussing a minor inconvenience, not a situation where her ship was surrounded and outnumbered 12 to 1. He had no vocabulary for this. "Senior Chief Petty Officer," he said, "I will ask you a direct question, and I want a direct answer. Ask, do you understand the tactical situation you are currently in?" He heard on her end something in the background, a small sound of movement, the faint edge of another voice, not speaking to him, someone nearby on the bridge of the Unconditional. The senior chief was silent for exactly 2 seconds, and in those 2 seconds, he had the strong impression that she was looking at someone, turning her head, checking on someone who was nearby. "Yes," she said, "we understand. And you choose not to surrender? We are not in a surrender situation." He looked at his screen. He looked at the 12 warships. He looked at the scan data. He looked at the cold reactor and the weapons rising to full charge. "I want to ensure I understand you correctly. You are one vessel. Your reactor has been cold for 3 days. You have 8 wounded crew members. You are surrounded. What, from your perspective, is the nature of your current situation, if it is not a surrender situation?" A pause. Continuing, she said. He was silent. The translation package offered nothing additional, and he tried a different approach. "Our records show that your ship participated in a clash in this sector 6 hours ago. In the clash report, the Unconditional is classified as neutralized." A short sound played over the channel. It was his translation package, which processed it, played it twice, and both times yielded the same result. Laughter. Not angry laughter, not mocking. A small, brief sound of a person who has just heard a description of themselves that they find a bit amusing. "Yes," she said, "we saw that report. You have access to consensus communications?" "We have access to many things," she said. And then, before he could respond, "We will take the medical supplies if the offer is still in force. We have a situation on Deck 7 that requires attention." End quote. He hadn't expected this. The turn from "we are not surrendering" to actually, "Yes, the medicine would be nice" was not a transition for which he had a tactical structure. "The offer is still in force," he said. "We appreciate that." A pause. Then, "Fleet Commander Vor, a transfer from your sector to the Inner Defense Command will be approved. I would take it." He froze. This was not in any data transmitted to him. His transfer request was in his personal command file, encrypted within internal consensus systems. "How do you know about that?" he asked. "You've been here a long time," she simply said. "You should go home." The channel went silent for a moment. Then, "We will keep the weapons active. I hope that's okay. End." She closed the channel. He sat for a long time in the chair of his flagship's commander, not moving. He thought about the 42 data points in Saris Dow's model. He thought about the word disintegrate and the reason it wasn't happening. He thought about the 147 short exchanges on the broken ship, each of them asking, "Are you still here?" Each answering, "Yes." He thought about the woman on the dead ship who had just told him, "No thanks, we'll manage. And besides, you should go home," in the same voice. He opened Saris Dow's model on his main screen. He read it all this time. All the data points. All the conclusions. The final paragraph. The one that read, "The disintegration mechanism is not activated because the individual's primary survival instinct has been redirected." The one that read, "They want to live because the person next to them needs them to." He looked at the Unconditional on his tactical display. The weapons complex was at 87%. He ordered his fleet to hold position. He picked up his cold coffee, looked at it, and finally drank it. Then he tagged Saris Dow's model, his own assessment, and Alas's initial report, and packed them into one priority transmission addressed to the theater level of Consensus High Command, which was a channel he had used once in 3 years for a real crisis. He titled the transmission, "Called Our Problem Requires Immediate Senior Staff Consideration." He attached a personal note in full. "I have been writing the wrong report for 3 years. Now I am writing the right one. Read the model first." He sent it. Outside, the Unconditional held its position. It did not move. It did not threaten. It did not commit any actions that could be technically classified as hostile. It was simply there, patient in the way of someone who has already decided that patience is not a sacrifice. The weapons complex reached 87% and continued to climb. Vor wondered, for the first time, if there was any point to the weapons at all. High Assessor Molny Red was the oldest person in Consensus High Command, which meant he was also the most likely person to remember the first time a human ship did something that didn't make sense. It was 11 years ago. A single ship, of a smaller class than the Unconditional, caught at the edge of a Consensus patrol deployment, not far from what was then still contested territory. The patrol was routine. The human ship was alone and outnumbered. And the patrol commander offered terms in the standard way, expecting a standard outcome. The human ship refused non-aggressively, almost politely, and then it damaged 2 Consensus ships before being disabled. The patrol commander filed an anomaly report. The instrument error assessment attached to that report was written by a 8-year-old junior analyst named Molny Red, who looked at the data, decided it was a sensor malfunction, and moved to the next file. He had thought about it for 11 years. The priority transmission from Fleet Commander Vor arrived at 6:10 and ended up on Molny Red's desk at 6:15, which was fast. Molny first read the cover note. "I have been writing the wrong report for 3 years," and then he called an emergency session of the High Command Assessment Panel for 8. He did not sleep between 6:15 and 8. He spent that time reading Sarah Dow's model. He read it as he had read very few documents in his career. Not critically, not looking for errors or weaknesses, not building rebuttals. He read it as a man who already knows the answer to a question and watches as someone else arrives at it from a different direction, hoping they reach the same place. They reached it by 7:45. The assessment chamber was full. 6 high assessors, including Molny, 4 senior military advisors, 3 specialists in xenobiology and behavioral modeling, 2 communications directors who were there because they might be needed for rapid deployment if decisions came out of this session, and Sarah Dow, sitting at the end of the table in a chair that was technically reserved for analysts presenting reports, but was usually occupied by people of much higher rank than she held now. She looked as if she hadn't slept all night, which was true. She looked as if she had been waiting for this room for a long time, which was also true. Molny opened the session, displaying everything on the main display simultaneously. All 43 cases, all raw data, 11 years of clashes laid out chronologically. And in all of them, the same curve, the human curve going in the wrong direction. Performance increased as conditions worsened. Groups held on longer than any reasonable expectation. Ships fought beyond when the fight had any mathematical sense. The room watched it. Senior military advisor Pell, who for 8 years had argued against the theory that human behavior required special strategic adjustment, who had called it alarmism in 2 separate official documents, who was the man who had written the note on Cerise's original paper. Interesting theoretical work, having no operational significance, sat with his hands pressed to the table and stared for a long time at the 11 years of data, saying nothing. "Walk us through it," Molny said to Saris. She stood. She didn't look nervous. At all. She looked as if she had rehearsed this, and then decided the rehearsal was wrong and was doing it from scratch. She started with the current situation, the unconditional, the current readings, the conversation between Vor and Senior Chief Petty Officer Ose Bonsu. She put the transcript of the conversation on the display and let the room read it. "We're fine. Continuing situation." The room read these 2 answers for a moment. "This is one example," she said. "This is 43 examples. And these are only the ones for which we have clean data. I believe the actual number, every clash in the registry." She pulled up the survival calculus model, the standard one that the consensus had used to develop military doctrine for 4,000 years. She walked them through it. Under sufficient pressure, any intelligent being will prioritize individual survival. This leads to group disintegration. Disintegration causes retreat. Retreat is a managed outcome. We have been applying this pressure to humans for 11 years, she said. Disintegration has not occurred. I want to explain why. She pulled up the comms logs on the screen. Not tactical data, the short dialogues, 147 small moments just with the unconditional. "Still with me? Right here. Got it. Don't you dare." She let the room look at them. "These are not anomalies," she said. "They appear in every comms log we have for every human clash. In the 30 seconds before a critical maneuver, crew members exchange these short personal confirmations twice as often as at any other time. Before the most difficult thing they are about to do, they tell each other that they are still present. They call each other's names." Assessor Yura, to Molny's left, the youngest member of the panel, leaned forward. "What is the functional purpose?" Saris had been waiting for this question. That is the right question. The functional purpose is not tactical. It doesn't improve accuracy, processing speed, or weapons output directly. She pulled up the weapons charge data from the unconditional. The overlay showed the charge rate versus the vocalization time. "Except it does improve it," she said. "Indirectly. Measurably. When the crew is actively, synchronously communicating, calling each other, their group performance increases. Weapons charge faster, not because the weapon changed, but because the people operating the systems changed." Assessor Pell spoke for the first time. "You are saying the mechanism is social?" "I am saying the mechanism is social. And consensus doctrine for 11 years has been looking for a biological or technological explanation and found nothing, because it was looking in the wrong category." The room went silent. Molny looked at the data curve, the one that went up when it should have gone down. "What are they protecting?" he asked. "When they refuse to disintegrate, what is the organism protecting?" Saris turned to him. This was the question she had been preparing for 6 years. "Each other," she said. "Not themselves, not the mission objective, not territory or strategic value. An individual in a combat group is willing to exceed their individual survival calculus, willing to go beyond where survival is statistically likely, specifically to protect the other members of the group. Group cohesion is not a side effect of the survival instinct. It is the survival instinct itself. They have redirected it." End quote, Pell said. "That is not how the survival instinct works for every species we have previously studied." "No," she said. "For humans, the data says otherwise." Molny thought about the first case, the one he had classified as an instrument error. He thought about what would be different if he had classified it correctly. He thought about the 11 years. "What does this mean strategically?" Yura asked. Saris took a breath. "It means the doctrine is wrong. The doctrine assumes that sufficient pressure applied to a sufficiently large human unit will trigger the survival calculus at the individual level, causing group disintegration. We have been increasing the pressure for 11 years. The group has not disintegrated. The group, in many cases, has become more cohesive under increased pressure because increased pressure forces individual people to invest more heavily in the social connection." She paused. "We have been doing the opposite of what we intended. The harder we fight, the tighter they hold together." It was very quiet in the chamber. Molny looked at the other assessors. Pell was still looking at his hands. Yura was looking at the data curve. The military advisors were doing the math that none of them wanted to voice. "An attrition model," finally said one of the advisors. The words came out carefully, as if he were gently placing them on the table. "If the disintegration threshold does not exist, then the attrition model does not work," said Saris. "You cannot win a war of attrition against an organism that becomes more cohesive as it loses." There it was, the true face. Molny had seen it for the last 40 minutes. From the first moment when he read her model at 6:15 and sat with the cold truth of it in the silence of his office, but to hear it out loud in the chamber, before all 6 assessors and 4 advisors in the language of official military assessment, was different. He looked at the 43 data points. He thought about the Unconditional there right now with a cold reactor and charging weapons and 23 people singing a funeral song, and he thought about how the song meant, "We are still here," and how the weapons were charging anyway, and how Vor had told the senior chief she was surrounded by 12 warships, and she said, "That's fair," and closed the channel. He thought about the woman on the broken ship who knew the name of the transfer request that lived in an encrypted personal file. "Comms logs," Molny said to Saris. "You have them for several clashes. They use each other's names before critical maneuvers." "Yes, why?" Saris thought about it for a moment. "I believe it's a reminder of what they are protecting. Before they do the hardest thing, they say, 'This is the reason. This is the name of the reason.'" She paused. "The name does what a combat order cannot. It makes the reason present, real." Molny sat with it. He was 61 years old. He had served the consensus for 38 of those years. He had participated in 3 wars, not counting this one, and he had approached each of them with the same fundamental assumption, that the beings on the other side of the conflict, however strange or unlike him they were, acted on the same fundamental calculus. Survive, continue. When the math gets bad enough, stop. He had been wrong once before, when he was 28. He had written instrument error and moved on to the next. He would not do so again. He closed the main display. "Analyst Dow," he said, "your model. Conclusion. Read it." She read it aloud in the formal chamber before all of them. The part about redirecting individual survival instincts, the part about fighting for each other, not for themselves. The final line. "The consensus is trying to defeat an opponent by applying pressure to a threshold that does not exist in the way we assumed." She finished reading. Nobody objected. Molny looked at Pell. Pell looked at him. Something passed between them that was not comfortable, was not permitted, and would not be permitted in this room today. "We need to discuss what happens next," Yura said. "Yes," Molny said. "We need to." He stood and walked to the viewport. They were inside, far from the border, far from the buffer zone where the Unconditional was drifting and charging and holding. Through the viewport was space, a standard view, stars and darkness. He thought about the clash in Kaldar 11 years ago, the instrument error report, the checkbox he had marked and the file he had set aside. He thought about everything that had been built on top of that decision. "We will open an official comms channel," he said, "above the theater level, the one we use before negotiations." The room went silent. "Sir," one of the advisors said carefully, "there remains the question of the current strategic position." "The current strategic position," Molney said, "is that we have been applying the wrong strategy for 11 years, and one broken ship is currently demonstrating that to us in real time." He turned from the viewport. "Open the channel." He looked at Cerise Dow. She was still standing at the presentation end of the table with her model on the screen behind her, 43 data points still visible, and 6 years of work that nobody wanted to read until now. "Well done," he said. He didn't say it the way commanders do when they mean "sit down, you're finished." He said it the way one says something when one means it simply, without ceremony. She nodded once and sat. The room began to move. Advisors were pulling out comms, protocols. Yura was drafting preliminary framework documents. Pell sat quietly, not moving, looking at the data curve that went up when it should have gone down. Molney returned to his seat. He opened the comms log with the Unconditional. He found the section Saris had flagged short dialogues, names, 147 confirmations that every person on that ship was still here. He read them. He found, somewhere deep in his consciousness, a question he didn't have an answer to yet. If there was no one next to you, what would you fight for? He set it aside. There was work outside. Somewhere in the buffer zone, the Unconditional was still holding its position, patient, unreasonable, alive. While the Consensus High Command was in session for 14 hours, the Unconditional was not idle. Saris Dow knew this because she remained connected to the direct stream of sensors from the inevitability of return all that time, running it on an additional screen while she sat in the assessment chamber and presented her model, and listened as the assessors asked questions they should have asked years ago. The stream was small, hidden in the corner of her screen. It was easy to miss. She didn't miss it once. In the first 2 hours after the formal session started, the Unconditional crew managed to restore partial power to 2 of the 3 secondary systems. Not enough to run weapons at full power, not enough to give them speed, but enough to stabilize life support at a level that wasn't dangerously low, and enough to bring one of the dark sensor arrays back to working condition, which meant the Unconditional could now see everything around itself. A little clearer. Saris noted this in her personal file, and then noted that the Unconditional crew had done it in about 1/3 the time her engineering estimate said it should have taken. She added the case to her model. Case 44. During a break in the session, when the assessors were reviewing documents and she was standing at the back wall with a cup of water she hadn't yet drunk, she extracted the direct comms log with the Unconditional. The stream was running in passive mode. The sensor array picked it up, registered it automatically, translated it in real time. She read it in an hour. They were still talking to each other the way they always talked. Repair updates, system status, how's the shoulder, better, rigid. You should bandage it again before the next shift. Already did. Liar, I'll do it right now. Content? Extremely. She read those 4 lines 3 times. She didn't know who Rhea was. She knew Rhea was on the Unconditional. She knew Rhea apparently hadn't eaten recently enough for someone to notice and say something about it. She knew that in the middle of a 4-hour standoff with 12 enemy warships, someone stopped what they were doing to make sure Rhea would eat. She drank her water. She returned to the chamber. By the 10th hour, the weapons complex had reached full charge and was holding it steadily and patiently. The Unconditional did not fire. It did not move. It did not transmit anything to the consensus ships surrounding it, other than the base transponder navigation pulse that read, "I am here. This is my position." The same signal an asteroid emits. The same signal anything emits when it is simply existing together and wants its existence to be acknowledged. At the 10th hour, sensor readings showed a change in thermal signatures inside the ship. Saris ran a quick analysis. Several crew members had gathered in a room that, according to the ship's diagrams, was the crew mess hall. There was a thermal signature consistent with an operating cooking setup. They were cooking food. She checked the time. By human standards, she checked the human daily cycle, matching it because she had spent 6 years building the most comprehensive database on human behavior in the consensus. It was mealtime. The consensus fleet had been on high alert for 14 hours. The Unconditional crew decided it was dinner time and acted accordingly. Saris wrote one sentence in the notes to her model: "Social rhythms are maintained under active standoff conditions. Maintaining group normality is a stress response, not a luxury." She paused, then added, "They know exactly what they're doing." At the 14th hour, the formal session ended, and Molny Red gave the order to open a high-level channel. Saris returned to her workstation, the small one she had been sitting at since 4:18 a.m., and watched as communication protocols were set up on one screen while continuing to hold the sensor stream on the other. A high-level channel going up to Consensus High Command. This was a channel that meant something. Not a patrol commander making a tactical offer, not a theater commander out of control. This was a channel that, historically in 4,000 years of Consensus diplomatic history, preceded serious conversations. Amara Ose Bonsu would understand what that meant. Saris was almost certain of that, just as she was certain of most things she had spent 6 years figuring out about how humans think. While the protocol was still being set up, a separate signal arrived, not on the command channel, not on the fleet network on Saris's personal research channel, on which there was a small indicator on her workstation that never lit up with an external contact. Her research channel wasn't a widely known address. It wasn't in the standard directory. One had to specifically search to find it. The signal was from the Unconditional. She opened it. It was audio, a voice from Vor's log, Senior Chief Petty Officer Ose Bonsu. A bit less raspy than 14 hours ago, which meant she had also eaten and perhaps slept a little, or at least rested, because they were careful about such things. Saris knew this from the logs. "We have been watching your ship's scan pattern since about the 3rd hour," said the Senior Chief. "You ran deep biometrics 6 times. It wasn't the commander. He was conducting tactical actions. The biometric pattern was different. Thorough. Someone was paying attention to specific things. I thought it was you." Saris looked at the communication request. She opened a 2-way channel. "How did you find my research channel?" she asked. "Hello, Saris. You published a paper 3 years ago, the one that argued human behavior needs special study. The submission headers still had your contact details. It took about 4 minutes. Saris thought about that paper, about the meeting where she presented it, about the word hobby. "Did you read it?" she asked. "Yes." A short pause. "Your model is correct. I wanted you to know that from our side, looking at it from the inside, you are right." Saris stared at her screen for a moment. 6 years. 44 data points. A model that nobody wanted to read until the Unconditional made it impossible to ignore. "Thank you," she said. She held back the rest of what she thought in her voice, which took some effort. "You're welcome," said Amara Ose Bonsu. Then, after a pause, "Also, we have extra rations. We cook too much. If anyone there wants any, we aren't going anywhere." Saris stared at that message for a moment. A broken ship offering food to the surrounding fleet. She thought about the short exchanges in the logs. "Eat something. Not now, Rhea. A special care of people who know down to their bones that bodies need care, especially when caring for them feels like an interruption. I will pass that on," she said. The channel remained open for a few seconds. Not because either of them had anything to say, just an open frequency, her small space. "The high-level channel that is being set up," Amara said. "That's a good sign. Who is sending it?" "High Assessor Molny Red." A very short pause. "Tell him I wish him a good morning." Saris checked the time. It was evening locally. It wasn't morning. "It will be by the time he is ready to talk," said Amara Ose Bonsu. And in her voice was something that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite confidence, but perhaps both at the same time. The channel closed. Saris sat at her workstation in the silence of the station that had been operating for over 18 hours and watched the sensor stream. The Unconditional on the stream was a shape, a damaged shape, tilted from the damage on the port side, slightly listing in the slow rotation it had been performing from the beginning. The weapons complex was a stable line on the display. Full charge, stable. She extracted the last hour of the comms log. She read it the way she had read all the others, looking for a pattern, an imprint of what she had been trying to explain to people for 6 years. "How's the shoulder?" "Better. Rigid. You should bandage it again before the next shift." "Already did." "Liar. I'll do it right now." "Content?" "Extremely." She read them all. Practical and personal, woven together, impossible to separate, because to these people, they were not separated, never had been separated. Work and care existed in one breath. She thought about how Molny Red asked what they were protecting. She thought about her answer. She opened her model, the conclusion section. She read what she had written and thought. Was it still what she wanted to say? Yes. She added one paragraph beneath it. Note: the mechanism is not complex. It does not require special biology or technology or a structure that is fundamentally different from any other intelligent form of life. The mechanism is this. Humans practice noticing each other. They practice it constantly in the smallest possible moments until it becomes what they do without thinking. A reflex that says, above all else, the person next to me is still here. It is a practice. Accumulated over years and decades, it generates a group that does not disintegrate under pressure, because disintegration would require each individual to stop noticing, and they cannot stop. They have practiced too long. Weapons, attention, armor, memory. Power source. The weight of one specific name. We have no unit of measurement for this. Never will. She saved the model. She looked at the sensor stream again. The unconditional was still there. It would be there when the high-level channel finished setting up. It would be there when the first formal message came through, the one that meant serious negotiations were starting. It would be there in the morning when Molny Red finally transmitted via the high channel, and it would be there after that. Not because it couldn't leave, but because it had 22 reasons to stay. On the sensor stream, the thermal signatures inside the unconditional shifted slightly. Some of them dimmed. Sleep patterns. The crew was resting in rotation. How does a military crew rest? Never all at once. Always with someone watching. Others remained bright, people working, repairing, watching. One bright signature was moving around the ship on a path that, per Saris's experience over 6 years, meant around someone going the full length of the ship, briefly stopping at each station, checking on everyone, making sure. The weapons complex held at full charge, a stable line that did not fluctuate. Somewhere in the buffer zone between the consensus fleet and the human border systems, the unconditional was breathing, not waiting for rescue, not counting the time until the end, simply being there in the way. Something is there when it has already decided that being there is exactly where it intends to be, and the universe can have its opinion on it. And the universe's opinion, in the end, is noted and not particularly decisive. Saris Dow turned off the overhead light and continued to run the sensor stream. She watched the unconditional in the dark. She watched the bright signatures inside it, the living warmth of 23 people who were told they were neutralized and who quietly and completely disagreed. And she thought about all the things her model had guessed correctly and about that one thing she hadn't quite said. It wasn't that humans didn't know how to stop. It was that they found, every time they considered the possibility of stopping, another name, another reason, another person whose face was in their head when the hardest moment arrived. And that was always enough. The high-level channel finished setting up at 2:14. The message that came through was formal, official, above the theater level, the one that meant, "We would like to talk." The unconditional received it. It replied in 40 seconds. Amara Osebonsu's voice sounded over the high channel, high command, into the room where Molny Red sat with 43 data points and 11 years and 1 instrument error report that was worth more than he had understood back then. She called him by name. He checked his records after that, like Vor. He hadn't received it in any transmission. It wasn't in any data the unconditional had obtained access to. He never learned how she knew it. He decided, after some time, that it didn't matter. What mattered was that she knew it, and she said it. And when she said it, just for a moment, High Assessor Verita sat in his official chair in his official chamber and felt, with a clarity that surprised him, like a human, like a specific human, like someone whose name, in someone else's mouth, was special and unique. He realized in that moment what a weapon was. He began to speak.